Pacific Island leaders are calling out rich nations for not doing enough to mitigate climate change in Asia and the Pacific region. Now, they're demanding greater access to zero-interest funding for mitigating the impact of climate change, which they say is largely caused by emissions by developed nations. Now, the appeal came at a UN climate change forum that's happening in Thailand. CNA's Ottilie Edwards spoke with Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, and he described the unique vulnerabilities of Pacific Island nations.
Well, I think, the one thing to understand with climate change is that it's incremental in some places, it's insidious, and it's inevitable. So the things that affect us most at the moment within the region, of course, we're seeing more extreme weather conditions, more severe cyclones. In our own country, it'll be more severe flooding in parts of our country, and then in other islands, it's more prolonged periods of drought. So there are different impacts of the climate that are occurring and that have been occurring over years now that we've been living through. Things like increased sea surge, which cause erosion on our foreshore and on our islands. They wash over runways, which create our airstrips requiring resilience building to withstand the more frequent weather impacts that we're suffering now. So these are some of the things that we're seeing on our own shores. But of course, across the Pacific, there are examples of our countries in the Pacific being hit. Every season, someone in the Pacific will get hit with a more severe cyclone.
Rich countries simply not doing enough has been the general consensus among Pacific Island nations for quite a while now. And you've also said that this pandemic has shown that we cannot employ normal economic responses to this abnormal situation. So what exactly are you proposing?
Well, inevitably, when we talk about what are the solutions for Pacific Island countries, we know that globally there's a need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But while we're going through that process, in the Pacific, the most urgent need is around adaptation and building resilience to the impacts of climate change. And of course, to build resilience requires money. So access to finance to enable us to be able to build resilience on key infrastructure, on housing and building facilities and so forth, that has been really difficult to access over the years. The institutions that were set up after the Paris Agreement with the Green Climate Fund, the replenishment fund for the second round is now coming forward, and really would like to see countries making a serious effort to putting money towards initiatives like the Green Climate Fund or other climate funds to help countries like us access these funds more easily in a form that doesn't add to our debt burden, which many of us have come through out of COVID. So these finances need to be in the form of either grant funding or very concessional loans on conditions that are much more extended out for longer periods of amortization at 0% interest. New financing modalities really is what we're looking for, is what's needed to address the current impacts that we're feeling from climate.
Now, Prime Minister, as a real micro economy, you've got 17,500 people in the Cook Islands. You've got no central bank, very limited levers to influencing monetary policy. But I'm wondering, collectively, as Pacific Islanders, are your concerns taken seriously enough?
Well, we hope they are taken seriously enough. As a region, we cover quite a large part of the world. But in terms of economic size and population size, we're very, very small. And I hope that that's not a reason why our voice shouldn't be heard more. But for most of our Pacific Island countries, we expect to have our voice being heard. We expect to have our concerns being addressed because we're the ones feeling the impact of climate change, at the forefront of the impacts of climate change caused by countries that have much larger emissions of greenhouse gases, that are enjoying the benefits over decades of the impacts of their carbon greenhouse gases. So there needs to be a moral responsibility on some of the wealthier countries to really do their part to help countries like us that are at the forefront of the impacts of climate change.
Is there also a sense that, the world powers right now, they're focused on expanding their military budget, with rising US-China tensions, that, wanting to efforts to build climate resilience has taken this backseat and it makes your pitch even harder?
Yeah, it is a concern for us when the larger powers in the world, their concept of national security is very different from our concept of national security. For them, a military presence, security concerns are growing in priority. For our countries, economic security is our national security. Climate security is what we consider as national security. These are the things that we need to have addressed as we emerge from a post-COVID world, but also as we continue to face the impacts of climate change. And we're hoping that the larger countries will be able to recognize that we in the Pacific have very different national security issues and priorities compared to what they have.
And when you meet G7 leaders, which is happening this week in Japan, how do you intend to present your case and sort of get a more equal footing when you're discussing financial options?
Well, I think precisely as I've mentioned it to you now, this growing geopolitical tension within our region, it places members of our region in an area of competition. Now, for our Pacific Island countries, we don't want to be seen as an area of competition. We want to be seen as an area of collaboration. Now, we have diplomatic relations with numerous countries around the globe that we engage with to help us achieve our development priorities and to help us reach our climate security concerns that we have, not as an area of competition or contention that we're starting to see from the larger powers in the world.
And Prime Minister, separately, right, I'm just wondering, how worried are you about nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS deal? You know, the Pacific region was used as a nuclear testing grounds back in the 40s, and that killed thousands of animals and damaged the fragile ecosystems.
Well, as you're aware, the Rarotonga is named after the Rarotonga Treaty to keep the Pacific as a nuclear-free zone. The AUKUS arrangement with Australia, the US, and the UK is something that they have entered into themselves. For us, as I said, what they consider as national security concerns are not what we consider national security concerns. And I just hope that our voice, in terms of what we consider a priority, will be taken into consideration by the larger countries.